I got to go swimming with the manta rays. And it was one of the most moving, beautiful experiences. I cried a bit with my mask. I had to sort of come off and get rid of it. It was absolutely exquisite. It was sort of so spiritual. I sort of actually find it hard to get the words. But then what was so shocking was seeing how, they swim and they've got their mouths open as they're feeding. And there was little bits of plastic. And you could see it going into them. And it was just such an affronting moment where I was so having my bucket list experience, swimming with manta rays, absolutely just nature in its purest form, and then seeing a little bit of plastic and sort of the human intervention that has happened. And I think that's a moment that will always stick with me for both the positive and for the negative.
This is Wild by Nature, stories of human connection to the wild. This is a podcast exploring how nature, ancient wisdom and lived experience guide us back to purpose, balance and belonging. I'm your host, Vian Sharif, and if you've ever felt the pull to slow down, reconnect and listen more closely to the world around you, you're in the right place. Hello everyone, and welcome to Wild by Nature, where we explore the profound relationship between people and the natural world and the ideas shaping a more resilient future. I'm your host, Dr. Vian Sharif. Today's guest believes that solving our challenges isn't simply about finding better ideas, it's about bringing together the right people to act on them. Serena Oppenheim is the co-founder of Fin-Erth, a global community connecting leaders from business, finance, conservation, policy and entrepreneurship and technology to accelerate nature-positive solutions. Serena, welcome to Wild by Nature.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, me too, for after so long. Serena, before we talk about Fin-Erth, I'd love to begin with your story. Are there any moments which come to mind where you really felt incredibly overwhelmed by the power of nature, or which really, really moved you?
Yes, and so many. So I was lucky enough to sort of have one of my bucket lists happen. I got to go swimming with the manta rays. And it was one of the most moving, beautiful experiences. I cried a bit with my mask. I had to sort of come off and get rid of it. It was absolutely exquisite. It was sort of so spiritual. I sort of actually find it hard to get the words. But then what was so shocking was seeing how, they swim and they've got their mouths open as they're feeding. And there was little bits of plastic. And you could see it going into them. And it was just such an affronting moment where I was so having my bucket list experience, swimming with manta rays, absolutely just nature in its purest form, and then seeing a little bit of plastic and sort of the human intervention that has happened. And I think that's a moment that will always stick with me for both the positive and for the negative.
So looking back over your career, what experiences have shaped the way that you think about bringing people together? I
think, when you think about bringing people together, it sort of comes from your earliest childhood memories. It comes from your time at school. If you're at university. It comes from, sometimes the first job, but maybe it comes around sitting with your friends on a Saturday afternoon and sort of seeing the interaction of people from there. So when I think about sort of the influences on it, it's never really come from my career. It's come from my friends, it's come from my family, it's come from those childhood experiences.
Yeah, and you do have this phenomenal ability to inspire connection. It's very special. And I remember some of the first Fin-Erth dinners around your dinner table.
Yes, Lebanese takeout, because I'm a terrible cook.
It was extraordinary.
Well, actually, it's really great because, Vian, I think you were at the second ever Fin-Erth dinner before it was even Fin-Erth. And you asked about the influences that sort of have made me who I am or what's happened. I think one of the biggest is that I grew up with a family that very much sat down around a lunch table, a dinner table. Sort of every night as a family, we sat down. We had a lot of friends around, but it was always around sharing food and sort of having that time, just chit-chatting, having a conversation, asking someone to pass the salt, finishing someone else's food if they weren't finishing it. It's the time sharing food, breaking bread together that I always felt was sort of the most soul-filling. That or actually being in nature, but we'll come back to that later. But it was sort of sharing a table of food with friends, with family, or with people you don't know, and chatting about ideas. I think that has been the biggest influence, and sort of watching how different people engage with each other. I've always found that absolutely fascinating, and seeing how the energy changes, or like positively or negatively, when people are sort of in those situations. And so I think that's sort of what really inspired me around Fin-Erth as an accident.
Yeah. And you do have that gift to understand how the dynamics between people can bring something amazing alive. But you did mention nature, and that leads me to my next question, which is around your experience with nature. Often people who are inspired to do something of this kind in service to nature for the long term have had a moment that changed them. Was there one of those for you?
I always call these the aha moments. And I don't think there's been one. I think there have been many. So I was lucky enough to grow up in a family where every holiday we were in nature, whether it was in the sea, in water, in the mountains, in hills in Scotland, walking, whatever it was. There was a lot of nature. And I sort of hadn't really realized that until I was a lot older. But my aha moment, and I think it's very similar for a lot of people who are either surfers, scuba divers, and their love of the ocean, or in my case, as a skier. My aha moment was I grew up spending a lot of time having the privilege to ski. And I remember sort of looking at a glacier that I'd grown up seeing and seeing how far it had retreated. And it was just over like a 5 to 10 year period. And I'd sort of skied that glacier or abseiled down it. And sort of every year it was retreating, and then talking to the locals and the ski guides who really understood it, and seeing how much sort of anxiety or worry they had, an appreciation for the change. I think that was one of my sort of aha movements in my 20s, but I didn't do anything about it. At that point, I was like, I love nature, but I didn't really sort of realize that there could be a career in nature and climate, or that there could be sort of a part that I could play in it. But then my aha moment actually comes from probably a nature story which is unexpected. So it's not being in nature. It was being at, sharing food again at a dinner table with an amazing woman called Hannah. And so Hannah Tucker started an amazing dinner series. And I went to one of her first ones sort of pre-COVID in 2018. And I think that was my aha moment. Because what Hannah did is she had a small number of people around, and she's been in climate for years. Absolutely brilliant. Actually, you should have her on the podcast.
We should. And those disruption dinners are, shout out to Hannah. Yeah.
You've been to them as well?
I have. They were outstanding. We did a few.
So I went to one of the very first ones she did. And what Hannah did was showed the impact of, whether you want to call it climate change, nature change, biodiversity crisis. There's so many different ways we could call it. But she cooked the foods of the future. So she cooked the foods that we're going to eat because of the impact that humans are having on the planet. And then what was more shocking for me is she told me the foods I'm not going to get to eat. And it was so real. And as someone who really cares about food and really cares about sitting around the table with people, and so many of my favorite childhood memories and memories around it, it was so shocking to me. And, when she said that a lot of shellfish, so particularly lobster, crab, all of those foods which are considered such luxuries and, what a privilege to be able to eat them. And she was like, actually, they're probably not going to exist because of the rising acidity in the ocean and the rising temperature. It was such a visceral moment for me. And then when she served jellyfish, I was like, this really is going to affect how we're going to live, and how the next generation's going to live. And and then I started doing more and more research. And that's when I sort of basically stuck up my hand and was like, okay, how can I get really more involved than how I am tangentially at the moment?
That is a beautiful share. And thank you for reminding us of that incredible experience that Hannah gave us. And one thing I love about what you've said is that this was a sort of story that went from point to point. It wasn't always linear for you, just like nature isn't always linear. It comes around in cycles. Sometimes it inspires you in one way, it takes you down a different path. And just looking back, do you see your own journey to where you are today unfolding in a similar way? Was it cyclical? Was it linear? Where's it going to go from here?
I think the term is, it was an accident. I'm always so impressed with people I come across who are like, at 18, I knew I wanted to be a doctor, or I knew I wanted to work in climate, or I had this one particular passion. And I'm always really inspired and impressed because at 18, at 21, at 24, like even at 30, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I cared about certain things. I was really interested in business, but I wasn't really sure my path. And the way I see my career is every time you do something, or you meet new people, there's an element of compounding and seeing what doors are open. And then it's your choice which one you're going to push and walk through. So everything, if I'm really honest, a lot of it has not been by design. It's not been a plan. It's been an accident. So, for example, Fin-Erth, there's two aspects of it. One, I never thought I would start a conference business. I hate conferences. I sort of didn't want to go down what has often been seen as quite a traditional path for women, which is convening people. I also, Fin-Erth is predominantly for women. It's a women's organization. And the irony is I used to hate women's organizations. Whenever there was a women's event, I was like, oh, I don't want to go to that. And I didn't want to go to it because I think it put you sort of in a bucket. And so all of those experiences help shape what we're building with Fin-Erth. Yeah, so to me, it's all been an accident. And actually, there's a couple of people I kind of need to blame for the accident because it wasn't me pushing the door open. It was some other people who pointed things out to me and said, maybe you should do this as a business. Or I should sponsor one of these dinners. Vian, you were one of those amazing people who came to the early dinners, introduced by mutual friends. And you were like, this is so great, I want to sponsor. So it wasn't like I was like, oh, this is an opportunity. I sort of took what other people were saying, were like, oh, maybe I should do this as a hobby. And, and I think that's the power. You asked the question at sort of the beginning, the power of sort of people and where it comes from. I think that's what I think is a lot of the best accidents come from chance encounters and people believing in you, even if you don't yet believe in yourself.
Beautifully put. Tell us a little bit about your approach, because one thing I've noticed is that you very rarely spend time talking actually about climate solutions and nature solutions themselves, but instead you spend your time bringing together the people who are thinking about those solutions or putting them out in the world. When did you realize that your greatest contribution wasn't necessarily about creating the solutions yourself, but bringing those people together to become perhaps greater than the sum of their parts?
It's funny because I'd never really thought about it like that until you said it. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what we do. Is what happened was, and the sort of the origin story of Fin-Erth, I've said it's an accident sort of 5 minutes ago, and it really was. So what happened was I got approached to get involved in a large natural capital project. I used to develop a wind farm in the northwest of Scotland. So I had experience in renewable energy and had worked with some phenomenal people on building out the environmental impact statement. I had thought that was interesting, but sort of didn't think that much more of it. And then when I got approached to do a large natural capital project in Scotland, this was in 2021. It was one of the first projects in the UK, and this was just after the Brewdog deal. It was one of the first projects where we were trying to go to market in a slightly different way, where we weren't trying to sell the land, but do a long-term leasehold. And the complexities of what we were trying to do were just sort of out of control. We couldn't legally structure it. We couldn't financially structure it. And even the botanists were unsure what to do. And there were sort of many debates, and because of the carbon market. And so there were sort of so many reasons to pull back from the market of doing a large natural capital project. So we pulled back from that. And that very first dinner I hosted wasn't really about anything else except I needed help with unlocking my solution. And I was incredibly frustrated that I couldn't work out how that we could move this natural capital project forward. And I'd been speaking to some fantastic people in this space, but I basically convened that dinner because I was like, I kind of want to see what some of my girlfriends think. And all the people at that very first dinner are phenomenal. They're in private equity, they're in asset management, they're in venture capital, they're at family offices, but they were all working at the intersection of finance and climate. And I basically convened them as a dinner to be like, I need help. What do you guys know about this space? And a lot of them were like, actually investing in nature, we don't really know it. We don't really understand it. It's so nascent. But this is what we need help with. And it might have been anything around carbon markets, might have been anything around ESG. There was a couple of people working in energy. And so the conversation went round. And what was interesting is at the end, I was like, oh, that wasn't that helpful for me on natural capital, but I'm really glad I could pull my friends together. And a couple of them had been like, oh, I met you at this conference, or I met you at this conference. We never followed up. And I sort of had a little bit of like, okay, that was kind of fun. And it was very intellectually interesting to sit around the table and hear what everyone else was working on. So the origin story of that was a bit of an accident. But when I realized that we had something, was after doing a couple of dinners and people saying, actually, can I bring 2 of my colleagues, or can I bring my friend? Can I bring this? And I bring this person. And I would sit down. And what we do at Fin-Erth is it's different because we never have panels, we never have keynotes. It's our belief is that everyone in the room has the experience and the knowledge to be able to deliver that keynote or sit on that panel. And after doing a couple of these dinners, what I reflected on my own experience of going to conferences is I'm an introvert extrovert, and I find conferences incredibly transactional. So you go to a conference and you're sitting there listening to the panel where half the people have paid to be on the panel, and they've been given a sort of, and this is a cynical way of looking at it, but a PR puff piece of what they've been told they can say or cannot say by their team. And then there's like an awkward 20-minute networking. And the awkward 20-minute networking works really well if you're incredibly confident and you're an extrovert. If you're at all a bit shy or a bit awkward, it's everyone just looking at your name badge to see transactionally. You're not meeting as like human to human. You're like, oh, you're at Google, we should chat. You're here, we should chat. And so much of it's just purely transactional. And so I sort of reflected on that experience and picked up the phone to Patrick, my co-founder, and he was working material innovation at the time. And we were discussing the fact that when we go to these conferences, it's very transactional. It's people just talking the same shit over and over again. And we're like, well, why aren't these solutions moving forward? And I was reflecting on how long it had taken the wind farm development that I'd worked on to move forward. Why was natural capital a couple of years later still so nascent? Why was it so hard? And so the aha moment was, I'm working on these one projects. But actually, if I can connect all these people who, quite frankly, are way smarter than I am, they're really detail focused in a way that I'm not, and they see things in a different light. If I can connect them all, what can happen? And what could happen was some amazing examples have come out of this. But that was sort of the aha moments that I can work on one project and really get into it. And hopefully that can move the needle. But also as someone with a chronically short attention span, and it's very honest, is it means that I can see and hear different things that are happening in the nature space or in the food and ag space or in the energy space, which means that I can connect the dots that other people potentially can't, just because, for no other reason than I'm getting to sit around the table and listen to them, and I'm getting access to that information. And so I think that's where the privilege of what it is that I can do to help move the needle forward is being able to see the wood from the trees.
Yeah. No, I think back to these, there are sort of different levels of conference transactionalness, from the saddest conferences in the world with no lights and spiral carpets to some can be a little bit more inspiring, but you're quite right. what you've managed to do is bring people together from a number of different disciplines. So whether that's finance, technology, policy, entrepreneurship, business, those worlds, they do work alongside each other, but they don't always speak the same language. So what have you found about that?
I don't even think they work alongside. I think they work tangentially.
Right.
So what I realize is, I was a tech entrepreneur for a very small amount of time, and I know nothing about the corporate world. And, they're just these two ships running really parallel and very rarely talking, or one or two people talking. And take it from the climate perspective on the nature side, is you've got what I've realized over the last couple of years of doing this work is you've got the nature people who are fantastic and they're enthusiastic and they're running alongside. And then you've got the people who are unlocking capital in the finance side. And they think they're talking, but so often they're not. And maybe it's that they're talking different languages, or often they're actually not in the same room. And I think there's sort of two examples I have here that I always think about. One is we run an awards program, the Fin-Erth Climate Awards. And that's to shine a spotlight on 101 leading women in finance, business, and climate from around the world. And we do an awards dinner every year during London Climate Action Week. And last year, depending on who can come and travel in, and we have 10 awardees in each category, we sat the food and ag and the natural capital women all together on one table. And the conversation was electric. And what was so entertaining is everyone was like, why are we never sat together? Why are we usually at totally different conferences in totally different rooms? It's the same land. We're having the same conversations. And yes, there's marginal differences if some people are looking at conservation in a woodland area and other people are looking at arable farming somewhere else. But actually, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And then if they're looking at like biodiversity credits or carbon credits, or they're struggling with the same problem around a lack of insurance, let's have those people come together. And that's why when we're doing the awards lists, we're trying to break down silos in every single way. So let's say, for example, in the natural capital segment, which is interestingly one of the most popular areas to be nominated in. I think last year we had north of 200 nominations in that category alone, is making sure that the 10 awardees from the list for each year, it's not that they're from the same geographical area, making sure there's that diversity because they're solving problems in a different way, but making sure that if you were going to do the most interesting dinner party of those 10 women, that they're not all solving the exact same problem. So it's not necessarily 10 women, 100% in conservation. It's maybe 10 women, one who's maybe doing amazing work in data, like you and your team. Maybe it's a woman who's trying to figure out or has figured out an insurance product that means more money can flow into nature. Maybe it's someone who has managed to raise an amazing fund, which is unlocking into nature, because so the symbiosis of all of it, it's like how nature works together, it all comes together. We need to break down silos in every single way, shape and form. And that's one of the purposes and goals of Fin-Erth. And I think that's sort of one of our superpowers.
You've talked about how nature operates in a different way from the sort of linear way I always joke, it's like monoculture.
You've
Exactly.
got monoculture and then you've got like biodiversity. Yeah. And, you go to a conference and often it's like monoculture's like all these people are working in finance, solving the same problem, but how do you bring in other information? And actually there's a book that I recommend everyone reads. And it's called Messy. And no, it's not about the footballer. It's, and I embarrassingly, I can't remember the name, but let's put that out on the podcast.
Yeah.
And this book is all about some of the best and most innovative solutions come out of messy situations. And some of the examples they give, for example, one is in MIT, they sort of had these prefab buildings. And the example the author gives is there was a time when you had sort of a physics researcher next to a chemistry researcher, next to a maths researcher, next to a music researcher, because there was slightly disorganization in it and everyone was just trying to fill the rooms. But so people sort of wandered into the wrong room, had a conversation, and an idea was sparked, as opposed to the idea of let's put all the math people together. And so a lot of what we do is sort of organize chaos, organize mess in how you curate a room so that it's not the people you would expect to be in the room. And one of my favorite things to do is when we're sitting down for a Fin-Erth dinner or at the Fin-Erth forum and people are going around introducing themselves and someone says who they are or what they do, and you see people go sort of like, because it's unexpected. And we sort of joke it's a little putting sex in the room because it's like not who you would expect at the table. And then you find out what they do and you understand what they're working on. So I guess one example was during the COP28 dinner, we put the amazing woman who was leading climate at the US Navy on the same table as the woman who was doing an amazing job with climate and sustainability at Xbox. But actually they had a lot in common in terms of sort of different aspects. And so that's how we think, is it's like, how do you break down the barriers? How do you think differently? Because to actually solve, to solve the nature crisis sounds so grandiose, but to improve the nature crisis, it's about breaking down those silos and creating slightly messy situations.
Well, let's stay on this line, because if we think about leadership moving into a different future and how you've thought about what structures we might need or what structures we might need to not have anymore, nature, as we've said, doesn't operate in a necessarily linear way. It can be messy. It can feel very it can feel chaotic, but it adapts and it experiments and it responds.
And it's resilient.
And do you think that changes your view of what leadership should or could look like today and into the future? So what we traditionally know as leadership and how it needs to evolve to suit where we are today and what's going to happen in the future and the solutions we need?
I think we need another 3 hours to answer that and maybe a bottle of vodka. But yes and no, because I think we've got some amazing leaders who really are stepping up. And I think, so often it's easy to point a finger and say people are not doing a good job or look at the negatives. But actually, if you think about how far things have come in the nature conversation in the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, there's not a pat on the back, but let's actually celebrate those solutions. Let's celebrate those achievements. And there's something that I always find particularly frustrating, sort of in the climate and the nature space, is that everyone's very negative. And everyone's very negative for obvious reasons. Like, we're sitting in this podcast room, quite frankly, we're both pretty sweaty. It is really hot outside. We're in the fourth heat wave. It's only July. It's London. We see adaptation and resilience is going to be one of the biggest topics going forward. But I also think about sort of when in 2021, when we approached this natural capital, it was so nascent that there wasn't even conversations around it. There weren't really funds around it. So yes, there's still complexities, and there's going to be a lot more complexities about how we put nature on a balance sheet, whether or not that's the right thing. Are biodiversity credits the right thing? Are carbon credits? Is it voluntary carbon markets? There's all of these conversations. But I think actually there's some amazing leaders who have moved things forward. And I think we should be celebrating those and pinpointing them as leaders who have managed to get shit done, and surround them with more people who are getting shit done so that we can move solutions forward rather than just looking at the negatives.
Yes. And in fact, you've always used that expression, people who get shit done. Yeah. It's a Serena.
And those are the leaders. And that's one of the things we try to do with the awards is so often in the climate space, you go to, whether it's COP or New York Climate Week, London Climate Action Week, whatever it is, there's a lot of panels. And there's a lot of noise, and we joke a bit, it's a bit like the climate carnival. But being in the room is so important. But it's identifying the people in the room who are not just talking and who really can move solutions forward. And maybe it's because they've got the budget to be able to do it. Maybe it's because they don't have the budget to do it, but they're brilliant conveners or have the ability to sort of wiggle in whatever organization they're in to persuade the board member that they should invest there. And those are the people that our belief is, if you can bring them together, then there's huge power and energy in putting those get shit done GSD people together to move it forward and to sort of take it out from the noise.
Yeah. No. I want to move on to a related angle, which is in the work that we do at Nature Alpha, for example, and now with the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance, I spend a lot of time thinking about how financial systems can better recognize the value of nature, but also how financial systems and economic systems can be encouraged to move in more resilient directions for nature. But listening to you, I'm reminded that even the best systems actually depend on people who trust one another enough to work together on these things. When we think about that, where do you see this role of people working together and the trust that is required to build perhaps the systems of the future? Where does that come in for you?
Trust is a word that is so often bandied around, like community. But without trust, nothing's going to happen. And the reason why I say that is, there's an element of that sort of a over-the-top statement. But what I'm talking about is trust is built in the room, not the virtual room. Trust is built through spending time together. Trust is built in, if you're doing a deal, the many hours you spend debating, negotiating, showing up with the right values. And the complexity of what so many of the incredible doers are working on within climate, within energy transition, within nature, they sort of need to move as a pack. So if one person moves forward but everyone else doesn't, it's quite hard. And I mean, I'm sure many people who might be listening have heard the term bandied around, like, we're going to be the fastest follower. We don't want to be the first mover, but we want to be the fastest follower. But again, that comes down to them having a lack of trust. I was at the Fin-Erth Awards dinner, and everything we have is sort of under Chatham House rules. But there was an interesting conversation on the insurance side and how the insurance companies need to move together. But to move together and sort of make decisions that sort of affect the whole market, there has to be trust. Because if someone or two or three companies don't do it, what does that mean? And trust is not built through companies. Trust is built through people. And it's built through repeated interactions, repeated time together, sharing food together, having a drink together, having a coffee together, sort of running in and understanding what people are working in. And it's not instantaneous and it's not transactional. And so it's one of the core beliefs that we have at Fin-Erth. And I think so many people within the nature space agree it's trust. But also it comes down to, if you say you're going to do something, then you don't do it, that trust is broken. If you say you're going to do it and you get it done, that builds trust. And so, for example, if you're working on a nature project and the people you've hired or you're collaborating with don't execute on something, you're going to lose trust. And if they do, it's going to build trust. And so I think we all sort of in this space need to challenge each other a bit on this and sort of saying what you can do. But the other aspect is that I think it's very hard to build trust in this space because it's nascent, because it's complex, and also because there are so many different viewpoints. Should nature go on a balance sheet? Some people say yes, some people say no, other people, jury is out. And, at Fin-Erth, we don't take a position on what it should be. It's about putting the actual experts in the room and sort of letting them build trust to work out what they think the best path forward is.
And interestingly, when you talk in this way, and I think about walking away from a Fin-Erth convening, whether it's a dinner or an awards or around the table with you, my abiding feeling is actually of trusting the individuals around that table and what they've said, partly because they're there and partly because of you.
well, I'll take this as a compliment. The thing is, if you're reading all the newspapers, you think about all these corporates as, really bad players, and that they might be doing some stuff which might not be the best for the environment. But we often have this debate. Someone's like, you can't have someone from this company in the room. But our belief is it's about people. And so, as you say, it's about learning what is actually going on behind the scenes and not what the press is reporting. And then when you see what's going on behind the scenes, and there might be some excellent nature people at some of these big companies, and they are doing an amazing job of trying to push or convince the board or convince the CFO of what needs to be done. We should all be supporting those people so that they have the right data, they have the right projects, so that they can push it through. Because it's the individuals in the companies that can change the world.
It's about the people.
Yeah, it's all about the people.
So look, just moving on to something about why you do this, perhaps the hope behind what you do. You've talked about being deeply grounded in optimism. It's always felt that way with you, even though it's so easy to become overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge that we face potentially. Where does that optimism and hope come from for you?
It comes from the women in our community, to be honest. So I have the privilege of sitting around the table. And at this point, we've got over 1,000 women who have come to events around the world. And we've held events from sort of Singapore, Chicago, Nairobi, Edinburgh, COPs, Climate Weeks, World Economic Forum. Absolute brilliant doers. And when you sit around the table with them and you get the privilege to understand what it is they're doing in climate and the solutions they're unlocking, and more importantly, what they need help with, you can't help feeling a sense of optimism because they're not sitting around and bitching about the problem. They're not just saying, here's a problem. They're talking about the solutions. And that's how we've angled and created the content for Fin-Erth. Because what we realize is some people are also, there's a question we asked at this year's forum, and we host a Fin-Erth forum every year, and we've held it at Jesus College, Cambridge. 55 women, curated, invite only. And we asked a question both years. It was quite interesting to see is who's driven by fear to act and who's driven by optimism. And for most people, it sort of sits in the middle. For me, I'm driven by fear of what happens if we don't act. But I'm optimistic that amazing people can change the future. And what we often see at these dinners is people come in and these events, and often the attendees come in a bit defeated and a bit exhausted because they're the ones who are banging their head against a brick wall and being told no, or struggling to get the funding for a project they need, or their team keeps pushing back, or the political environment has made it very difficult, or there's always something. But when you put them together with other doers, it reminds them that they have got other people in the fight with them, and other people are struggling as well. But then they can hear where people are succeeding, or they can start thinking about collaborations. And, that whole, it takes a child to raise a village. I mean, it takes a village to raise a child. Let's get that one the right way around. Is, no one's going to solve the nature problem alone. It needs community. It needs people coming together. It needs trust. And so I get optimistic because when I talk to amazing women like yourself, and I could list so many off the top of my head, when I read the nominations that come in for the Fin-Erth Awards, and you see the scale of what's actually happening behind the scenes that the media won't give attention to, between the green hushing, the green washing, and you actually see what solutions are happening, you can't help feeling optimistic. We often talk about sort of who are your idols, or the people you're really sort of amazed by or you would want to meet. But honestly, when I look at the Fin-Erth Awards list, and this isn't me just being salesy or saying it, each of these women is so astounding in their own way. And their story of how they got to where they've got to, the tenacity, the integrity, the hard work, and often the sense of humor that they still have, it blows me away. And they're sitting there every day battling and moving these solutions forward. And so if I think about the people that I sort of really inspire me to keep going, it's the community of women. Because if they can do it, if they can show up every day, then so can we, and we can keep showing up to convene and put them together.
I think that's a beautiful point. And perhaps if we take that one step further, for our listeners who will, they will be operating in multiple different worlds. They'll have their personal lives, their professional lives. If having listened and having been surrounded by so many incredible doers who have this mission in service to a more resilient future for us all, nature part of that, what would you say to them in terms of doing one thing for nature or doing one thing in service to that direction?
There's sort of two different ways I could answer that. And I think one is reminding yourself why you love nature. And I think that's going to get you going. It's so easy. I live in a city. It's so easy to sort of forget why you love nature. And when I was walking to the tube today and there was all this rubbish, I had to cross sort of a bit of a motorway main road to get to the tube. And I was like, I just sort of want to come here with my gloves and just pick up all the rubbish. And I sort of started with a friend that when we're walking in the park and if we see litter, we just try and pick it up and put it in the bin. And, there's the little things you can do. But it's kind of like those cheesy sayings with an entrepreneurship. If not then when or whatever. We're going to have to fix that.
If not now, then when?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
It's just get up and do it. You don't need to ask anyone's permission. But, if you really care about elephant, if you really care about the oceans, if you really care about the biodiversity loss, pangolins, whatever it is, the one that I'm weirdly obsessed right now is space junk. Is, what are we doing with it? And I can see you nodding because you and I have had this conversation.
We've had this
before.
Conversation.
But I think the first step is just start reading about it. There's amazing tools out there. There's amazing, whether it's podcasts about nature, whether it's just going online, doing research, whether it's having a thought debate with AI, whether you use ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, whatever it is, and have that debate, and then see where you can get involved. And also, just going to say, is if you're working for a big company, so many companies actually now do have teams who are looking at nature or doing research around nature. So go find out who's working in your team and just go and invite them out for a coffee, have a conversation, learn from them.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Really?
Yeah. We just had coffees with the sustainability team. A lot of them, whether they wanted me to be there or not. But it was exactly that. One final question, Serena. Thinking about nature itself, with all your experience and the time that you spend in nature that I know is very nourishing and restorative for you. If nature could leave humanity with one lesson right now, what do you think it would be?
I think it is leaving us with lessons at the moment, which is it can regenerate itself if it's given space and time and the right resources. And two, it is suffering. I mean, you're looking at the heat across Europe, you're looking at droughts, you're looking at El Nino coming. Nature is talking to us. It's just whether or not we listen.
Serena, where can people find out more about Fin-Erth?
They could go to fin-erth.com, and it's not spelled the traditional way. So Fin-Erth actually means end legacy. So Fin and Earth, ERTH, it means end legacy, and that's what we want to leave as a better legacy for the planet and for everyone on it. So whether it's the little bugs or the people, and so that's what it means. So FIN-ERTH, but always happy to chat with anyone who's excited about nature and excited about getting involved. So yeah, get in touch.
Thank you so much for joining us on Wild by Nature, and thank you to everyone listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Wild by Nature. If today's conversation sparked reflection, grounded you, or reminded you of what matters, take a moment to stay connected. Follow Wild by Nature on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join me as we continue exploring what it means to live in relationship with the earth and with each other. We'll see you next time.
Resonate.